On the 5th of January 1942, the streets of Tokyo echoed with the exultant shouts of a nation drunk on victory. Yet aboard the combined fleet flagship Yamato, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto viewed the rapid conquests in the Philippines and Malaya with a seasoned mariner's caution. He instructed his chief of staff, Admiral Matome Ugaki, to begin preparing for the second stage of Pacific operations, demanding plans by mid-February. While the military nationalists pressed for unlimited expansion, Yamamoto, a reluctant warrior against America and Britain, understood the perils of a protracted war. His very presence at sea was a precaution, a removal from Tokyo where his dissenting views made him a target for assassination. For Yamamoto, these initial triumphs were not a prelude to final victory, but a fleeting advantage in a conflict he feared Japan was destined to lose in the long run. Yamamoto's skepticism was rooted in profound knowledge of his adversaries. Having served as a naval attaché in Washington and participated in the London naval conferences, he possessed an intimate understanding of American industrial might and British resilience. To his friend, the ultranationalist Ryoichi Sasakawa, he had prophetically described Japan's early advance as an octopus spreading its tentacles. Yet, he warned this euphoria was transient. He believed the pivotal moment for political negotiation would arrive with the fall of Singapore, a shock he hoped would compel the British to seek terms. "We must get a peace agreement by then," he told Sasakawa, estimating Japan had only 18 months to secure a favorable peace before the tide of war turned irrevocably against them. By January 5th, the Japanese octopus was indeed spread wide. The American battleship fleet lay crippled at Pearl Harbor. The British capital ships Prince of Wales and Repulse were sunk, and key strongholds like Hong Kong and Cavite had fallen. However, the strategic picture was incomplete. The American aircraft carriers, unharmed and at sea, represented a persistent threat to Japanese naval supremacy. The swift capture of Singapore, which fell on February 15th, sooner than Yamamoto anticipated, did not produce the desired political collapse. It became clear to the admiral that a more spectacular, decisive victory was needed to cripple American resolve and create a platform for negotiation, forcing the U.S. to the bargaining table from a position of weakness. The question of where to strike next ignited fierce debate within the Imperial General Staff. Yamamoto's ambitious proposal to thrust into the Indian Ocean, destroy the British Far Eastern Fleet, and link with German forces driving toward the Caucasus oil fields was vetoed by the army, which refused to commit to a Middle Eastern campaign. An alternative plan, advocated by the Naval General Staff in Tokyo, called for the invasion of Australia to sever it as an American base. Yamamoto rejected this as too protracted and insufficiently shocking to American morale. He sought a single crushing blow that would annihilate American naval power and demonstrate the futility of continued resistance to the war-weary American public. Driven by this strategic imperative, Yamamoto ordered his staff to draft a new, audacious plan. The resulting MI operation envisioned the invasion of Midway Atoll, a deliberate provocation to draw out the elusive American carrier forces for a decisive battle of annihilation. To supplement this, the AL plan detailed an invasion of the Aleutian Islands, creating a northern diversion. Yamamoto argued that victories at Midway and in the Aleutians would provide the political capital needed for Japanese diplomats to negotiate a favorable peace. His forceful advocacy eventually overrode objections from the Naval General Staff in Tokyo, who were preoccupied with southern operations. The strategic calculus was violently altered on April 18, 1942, by Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle's audacious B-25 bomber raid on Tokyo. While causing minimal physical damage, the attack delivered a profound psychological shock, exposing the vulnerability of the Japanese homeland and galvanizing American morale. For Yamamoto, the Doolittle Raid was a stark confirmation of the carrier threat and added immense urgency to his Midway plan. It silenced his remaining critics and made the destruction of the American carrier fleet an absolute priority, transforming the MI operation from a strategic option into a national imperative for the Imperial Japanese Navy. As Yamamoto prepared his combined fleet for the showdown at Midway, Japanese forces continued their southward advance independently. On January 23rd, they captured Rabaul, transforming it into a formidable air and naval bastion. From there, they pressed southward, bombing Darwin and landing troops in New Guinea, threatening the direct invasion of Port Moresby. In May, a Japanese occupation force bound for Port Moresby was intercepted and turned back by American and Australian forces in the Battle of the Coral Sea, the first naval battle fought entirely by aircraft. Simultaneously, the Japanese occupied Tulagi in the Solomons, beginning construction of a seaplane base. Unbeknownst to Admiral Yamamoto, whose focus was fixed on Midway, the Imperial General Staff had already planned the next southern offensive. Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake was ordered to prepare for advances against New Caledonia, Fiji, and Samoa, aiming to sever Allied supply lines to Australia. The resumption of the Port Moresby operation was scheduled for July, to be protected by the victorious combined fleet returning from Midway. This southern strategy proceeded under the assumption of continued Japanese naval dominance, an assumption that would be shattered in the cold waters of the Central Pacific. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 proved to be the catastrophic defeat Yamamoto had long feared. In a stunning reversal, 4 of Japan's premier aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, were sunk, along with their veteran air groups. The news was so devastating that the Imperial Japanese Navy suppressed its full extent, even from the Army. Despite this staggering loss, Imperial General Headquarters did not fundamentally alter its southern strategy. The drive to isolate Australia continued, with the Japanese establishing a foothold on the north coast of New Guinea and, most significantly, beginning construction of an airfield on the previously obscure island of Guadalcanal. Allied intelligence, spearheaded by the U.S. Pacific Fleet's Radio Intelligence Unit at Pearl Harbor, diligently tracked Japanese movements. By late June, reports from Australian coast watchers and Allied aerial reconnaissance confirmed the alarming pace of airfield construction on Guadalcanal. This discovery presented a direct threat to Allied control of the South Pacific. If completed, Japanese bombers from Guadalcanal could dominate the sea lanes, threaten Australia, and make any Allied counteroffensive immensely difficult. This intelligence forced a swift and decisive response from the Allied High Command. In Washington, the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff were divided on the Allied response. General Douglas MacArthur, commanding from Australia, advocated for a massive preemptive assault on the Japanese stronghold of Rabaul. Admiral Ernest J. King, the pugnacious chief of naval operations, argued for a more cautious, step-by-step advance up the Solomon Islands under Navy command. The compromise, reached in July 1942, was Operation Watchtower, an amphibious assault on Guadalcanal and Tulagi. The primary objective was to seize the nearly completed airfield and halt the Japanese southern advance. Command of the initial phase was given to the Navy. The planning for America's first major amphibious offensive since 1898 was rushed and fraught with difficulty. Vice Admiral Robert L. Gormley was appointed Commander South Pacific Force, but he was pessimistic about its prospects. Rear Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner was tasked with commanding the amphibious force, while Marine Major General Alexander A. Vandegrift was given mere weeks to prepare his 1st Marine Division for a combat landing against an unknown enemy force. Supplies were loaded haphazardly, rehearsals were disastrous, and key commanders, including the carrier Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, were deeply apprehensive about risking their precious ships in confined waters. As the American invasion fleet of over 75 ships converged on the Solomons in early August, it was shielded by stormy weather and astonishingly poor Japanese intelligence. The Japanese High Command, believing the U.S. carriers destroyed at Midway and the Americans incapable of a major counteroffensive, was caught completely by surprise. Their attention was fixed on the ongoing campaign in New Guinea. On the morning of August 7, 1942, under clearing skies, the American fleet arrived off Guadalcanal. The carriers launched their airstrikes, and naval guns began a thunderous bombardment of the beaches, heralding the beginning of a brutal 6-month campaign. The landings on Guadalcanal itself were initially unopposed. The 1,400 Japanese construction troops and 600 combat soldiers, stunned by the bombardment, fled inland from the beaches. The Marines pushed cautiously toward the vital airfield, encountering abandoned equipment and half-eaten meals, but little resistance. The mood among the invaders was almost buoyant. The enemy seemed to have melted away. However, this easy advance was a stark contrast to the savage fighting that erupted simultaneously on the small neighboring islands of Tulagi, Gavutu, and Tanambogo. Across the Sealark Channel, the Marines of the 1st Raider Battalion under Lieutenant Colonel Merritt A. Edson and the 2nd Battalion 5th Marines faced a determined and dug-in enemy on Tulagi. The Japanese garrison, composed of seasoned naval troops, had fortified the island's ridges and caves. The fighting was close quarters and brutal, with snipers hidden in trees and machine guns emplaced in interconnected positions. The Marines had to reduce each strongpoint with grenades, dynamite, and bayonets, learning quickly that the Japanese would fight to the death rather than surrender. The fighting on Gavutu and Tanambogo was even more vicious. These small, interconnected islets were dominated by a single hill, which the Japanese had honeycombed with defensive positions. The first Marine waves were met with a storm of fire. Japanese soldiers launched desperate, suicidal counterattacks, swarming American tanks with crowbars and gasoline-soaked rags. Reinforcements landing after dark were silhouetted by a burning fuel dump and cut to pieces. It took 2 days of relentless combat to secure the islets, and the Japanese garrison was annihilated almost to the last man, a grim portent of the ferocity that would characterize the Pacific War. The initial Japanese aerial response from Rabaul was swift but poorly coordinated. The first wave of Betty bombers, armed with bombs instead of anti-ship torpedoes, was intercepted by carrier-based Wildcat fighters. While the sturdy American planes proved deadly to the bombers, they were outclassed by the agile Japanese Zero fighters, which inflicted heavy losses on the American squadrons. Despite this, intense anti-aircraft fire from the Allied fleet and aggressive fighter attacks decimated the Japanese bomber formations. The legendary Japanese ace, Saburo Sakai, was severely wounded in these chaotic dogfights, a testament to the fierce resistance. Just after 1:30 a.m. on August 9th, Mikawa's force achieved complete tactical surprise. Using float planes to illuminate the targets, the Japanese cruisers unleashed a torrent of deadly long-lance torpedoes and accurate 8-inch shell fire on the patrolling Allied cruisers. In a brutal and one-sided engagement, the heavy cruisers USS Vincennes, Quincy, and Astoria, along with the Australian cruiser HMAS Canberra, were blown apart and sunk. The U.S. cruiser Chicago was heavily damaged. In less than an hour, Mikawa had inflicted one of the worst defeats in U.S. naval history, throwing the entire Guadalcanal operation into jeopardy. Stunningly, after this decisive victory, Admiral Mikawa chose to withdraw rather than press his advantage and attacked the now defenseless Allied transports. He feared discovery and destruction by American carrier aircraft at dawn, unaware that Admiral Fletcher had already withdrawn the carriers. This decision spared the vital Allied supply ships, but did not lessen the strategic shock. The Battle of Savo Island left the Marines on Guadalcanal isolated, their naval support gone and their supply lines severed. They were now stranded on a hostile island, holding a precarious perimeter around an unfinished airfield, with the Japanese Navy controlling the sea at night. In the aftermath of the naval disaster, the focus shifted entirely to the Marines ashore. General Vandegrift immediately consolidated his perimeter around the captured airfield, which was hastily completed and renamed Henderson Field in honor of a Marine aviator killed at Midway. The Marines, now acutely aware of their vulnerability, dug in and prepared for the inevitable Japanese counterattack. The easy confidence of the first day evaporated, replaced by a grim determination. The Guadalcanal campaign had truly begun, evolving from a daring offensive into a desperate struggle for survival, a brutal test of wills that would consume both sides for the next 6 months.